What I'd like to do is I'd like to say a couple of things about NLP, and then we're going to do an exercise around goal setting. So first of all, I'd like to talk a little bit about what is this thing called NLP. Now, Richard Bandler and John Grinder, why they couldn't have come up with a better name, I don't know, because it's, NLP, it's a bit of a mouthful. But let's have a look at it. So N stands, of course, for neuro, and it's really about what we think up here. The N stands for neuro. Anybody know how many thoughts we have a day? I don't know how this was calculated, by the way, but anybody know? I'd like to guess how many thoughts we have a day.
About 60,000.
Yeah, well done, Ian. It's about 60,000 thoughts a day. It's a lot. It's a lot of thoughts. And you may not have thought about it until this afternoon, but what proportion of your thoughts are really supporting you in what you want to achieve? You might like to ask yourself that question. What proportion is really supporting you, and what proportion of your thoughts are maybe sabotaging you right now? Because would you agree, we tend to be our own worst enemies. Henry Ford said we can never be more than we believe we can be. I was doing some work recently. It was about a 45-minute session with some young female students. It was a grammar school in the local area here, actually. And what surprised me was there were about 60 girls in the room, and they were just going from GCSE through to O-levels, so they were A-levels. So they were just moving from 16-year-olds into the sixth form. And what really surprised me, I was doing this exercise with them, and I asked them, because these were really the really bright girls, they were the girls that were really going to achieve in their lives. That was the path that they were very firmly set on. And I said to them, hands up, how many of you would have over, 50% of your thoughts a day that you think are really there, encouraging you and motivating you? Any idea how many girls would put up their hand in that room? These are the real high achievers. Any ideas? What do you think? Any ideas? I'll tell you, it's one. One girl. One girl put her hand out, and I thought, my goodness, because so often all that chatter that's going on in our heads, is really preventing us from being, the best that we can be. That's the problem. You've got one voice on one side of your head that's saying to you, yeah, Ken, go for it. You can do it. And you've got this other little voice that's saying, who do you think you are? You'll never do it. You're not good enough. You're not good enough. Hands up if you recognise that, this kind of internal dialogue. One little voice going, go for it, go for it. And that other little voice saying, who do you think you are? And we're going to look a bit more at that later on this afternoon. So that's the N for neuro. The L stands for linguistic. So that's about language, and it's not just about spoken language, it's also about non-verbal language. Because, it's very interesting, some research was done in the early 70s by a guy called Albert Mehrabian. And he looked at different this is not quite in proportion, but it never is, but he looked at the impact of communication in terms of our words, our tonality, and also our body language or our physiology. And what he discovered was very, very surprising. Because what he discovered was, anybody got any idea what proportion of the impact of our verbal communication our words have? Anybody know?
Less than 10%.
Yeah, it's actually 7%. It's really, really small, and yet we focus a lot on the words that we speak. Tonality is 38%, which those of the mathematicians in the room, you'll work out that physiology is around 55%. And so one of the things we study in NLP is how we can make all of that work for us. So not only in our verbal language, but also our non-verbal language. Because often, we might be saying something through our words, But if our body language isn't aligned to that, then we're not necessarily projecting out who it is that we really want to be. You know, and you see this often with people. They might say, yeah, I can do it. I can do it. You know, and yet their body language says a very different, or tells a very different story. And so one of the things we do is help people in all of those areas, you know, to really, again, be the best that that they can be. And physiology, you know, 55% of the impact of communication. And what's interesting is, you know, what we think up here tends to come out through our physiology. So if we're not absolutely convinced about the fact that we are good enough, then, you know, it tends to come out through our physiology. And that's some of the work we do also in NLP, is around the linguistics, is around not only the spoken word, but also our body language. Because spoken word is also really important. You know, I listen to people's language a lot, because their language tells you a lot about what they really believe. You know, do they really believe in here that they're capable of doing what they want to do? And you might want to start listening to your language. It's a bit like, you know, there's a big difference between someone saying, I'd really like to do that, but, you know, and someone saying, you know, I'm really going to do that. You know, I'm really going to do that. Or even, I may not have done it yet, and I am focused on doing that. Do you hear the difference? You know, and often we use language, we use but, can't, all sorts of words that really start sabotaging, you know, our progress before we even start. And then the P stands for programming, which is really about our strategies. So this is about what we think. This is about what we say in our verbal and our non-verbal body language, and this is really about what we do. Because if we run programs that are successful, then great, you know, that's really good. But so often I work with people whose programs in whatever area are running a bit awry. So I had a client recently, and we were doing some work around her buying strategy. So doing some work around her buying strategy, because her buying strategy was, yeah, when I don't feel very good, I go out shopping and I like to spend money. You know, and she particularly liked to buy shoes. You know, and when she got up to about 500 pairs of shoes in her wardrobe and was running out of wardrobes, that's when she came to see me. Because again, you know, she had the money, great, but actually she didn't have the money to buy all those shoes. And so we did some work around, you know, how can you change the strategy so that actually, A, she doesn't have to feel bad in the first place, B, if she does go shopping, she actually has a little check in there which makes sure that she's got the money to spend before she spends it. And we run programs for everything. You know, we run programs for our relationships, for success, for what we believe about ourselves, everything. And that's why, you know, if you look at NLP, what we think, what we say and what we do, it's very much the study of human behaviour. Would you agree? You know, it really covers just about everything. You know, it covers what goes on up here, covers what we say and what we do. And so with NLP, you know, we're really working with people on these areas to really help them, as I say, to believe, to think they're good enough, to really use their language and their body language in the most positive way, and to run programs, you know, that are really, really successful for them. So it's a very powerful toolkit.